I'm kind of a method director, meaning I absorb my subject as much as you can, and again, it's like music, film, everything. Like I'm just trying to be like, what is their ethos? And then I try and make a film that best represents that ethos.
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. In this episode, director Morgan Neville takes us behind the scenes of his new documentary, Roadrunner, a film about Anthony Bourdain. The film reveals how Bourdain went from chef at an obscure New York restaurant to a best-selling author, world traveler, Emmy-winning television director and producer, and one of the most notorious and beloved figures in the food world and beyond. Roadrunner was screened as part of the DGA's documentary series, which aims to spotlight groundbreaking nonfiction films by presenting screenings of documentaries, as well as conversations with their directors. In addition to Roadrunner, Mr. Neville's filmography includes the documentary features 20 Feet from Stardom, Keith Richards' Under the Influence, and Johnny Cash's America, and episodes of the television series Ugly Delicious, Abstract: The Art of Design, and American Masters. He was nominated for the DGA Award for Outstanding Directorial Achievement in Documentary for his 2018 film, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Following the documentary series screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Mr. Neville spoke with director Ondi Timoner about filming Roadrunner, a film about Anthony Bourdain. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
What an undertaking. Yeah, another round of applause.
Thank you.
I mean, first of all, I remember sitting down with you, I guess it was like documentary filmmaker, like 5 of us or something, having drinks right before the pandemic, December. And I said, what are you working on? And you said, I'm embarking on Bourdain. What a journey to take during COVID as well. And then 100,000 hours of footage or something like that. How do you begin to decode someone that complex and with that much footage? Where'd you start? Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, at the end of the day, I think when I redid the math, I think there were about 20 to 25,000 hours of footage, all things, being equal. I think we went through about 10,000 hours. There were a lot of episodes. I mean, basically, when you're starting to get into it, there were a lot of episodes he did that they're like the ones that mattered to him more, particularly like if he'd do a season of a show, they would do a couple of domestic episodes, which some of those are great, but some of them were like, oh, we can do the cheap domestic ones so we can go do more international ones. And the international ones were the ones that really kind of captured his imagination. And any episode anybody ever talked about, and he would write blog posts about the episodes, so you could kind of tell where he was more engaged. And often when you were looking at footage, you could see very early on in a scene if he was bringing it or not. If it was like, oh, it's just a food scene. Or if it's like he's there because he has a point he wants to make or he really wants to learn something. So it's kind of learning, hanging out with him, making this film, which we did do. We edited almost all of it during COVID, which in a way was kind of like a gift. I mean, I have to say, to be able to like hang out with Tony and travel when we couldn't leave our houses was actually kind of a great, like we kept saying to each other, like, thank God we have this film and each other to be working on this right now. It was like a great project for all the other pressures that we were going through.
I mean, it was gorgeous too. The photography, I was so glad that they talked about Zach who filmed it. Yeah. And, it unfortunately was in that Hong Kong episode where he was fired.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because, the early episodes, as you can see, are not beautiful. It's actually amazing how bad they look. But again, that was like Chris and Lydia with PD 150s running around doing the sound and the picture themselves. Like the crew on season 1 was the 2 of them and Tony, like not a sound person. And even to the end, they rarely used a sound person, which is kind of amazing because he really wanted to keep the crew small. Like it's amazing how small, even to the end, how small those crews were. If you could see under my mask, I'm smiling very widely just because we were just talking about how there was no business in documentary back then anyway. No. So who had a sound person? I know.
But I mean, you were up against such a challenge because you were taking on this film about a man who had committed suicide, and you didn't want it to be about that. A movie could have been made about him well before that. Such a complex
it could have been.
character.
And the reason I wanted to make the film was because I was a fan of his, but more because I wasn't a super fan, but I'd read Kitchen Confidential, and I think I'd read Medium Raw when it came out, his kind of second autobiography. And I had mutual friends with him. I'd done a show called Ugly Delicious with David Chang, and I got to know a bunch of people who all talked about Uncle Tony all the time. And I knew kind of what he meant to that whole world, and particularly the world of like alternative food media and all that stuff. And he was a guy who like had his own imprint where he would publish, underserviced voices and food and media and mysteries and really like put his name behind things that mattered. Whereas he would never put his name behind anything commercial, and people kept saying like, you could just put your name on a pizza chain and retire. And like, that would have been death for him. There was no way he was ever going to do that.
Is that the inspiration for the title? Tell us about the title.
Well, the title was, part of what, again, in getting to a film with a character, to me, it's about absorbing in the beginning as much as I can. And so I'm also like a music fanatic, and Tony was too. So I collected every song he ever mentioned, and he had put together playlists that he had posted online. But everything he mentioned in the footage and his Instagram posts, and I put together this playlist that's 21 hours long. It's on Spotify. You can see it and listen to it if you want, and it's great.
Wow.
I got, lots of people very excited about that playlist.
I gasped.
Yeah.
I gasped with Anemone by Brian Jonestown Massacre.
Yeah, well, exactly. You've got a connection there.
I thought Anton was going to pop up on the screen. I was like, Morgan interviewed Anton.
And Tony did love that song, and loved the band. And Anton was in an episode of Parts Unknown in Berlin.
Like he cooked him a lamb or something.
He lives in
right?
Berlin.
Yeah, he lives in Berlin.
Yeah. So anyway, I put together this playlist. I was listening to the music. He was a cineast, so I was watching all the movies that he loved. And part of it, this is actually really interesting, that particularly later on when the show could actually be more creative and he had more time and money and resources, that he would send a film to the crew and say, I want this episode to be like this film. So, they did Rome, it was The Conformist. When they did Boston, it was The Friends of Eddie Coyle. And they would sometimes, literally like change their lensing and cameras to really to mimic the effect of that film. And it was like a way of him of having an approach into some city. So there was an angle on it. So absorbing the movies in addition to the music and the books, and going back and rereading Graham Greene and Hunter Thompson and Joseph Conrad and all the people that, he had talked about. All to say, Roadrunner was one of these songs. He loved the Modern Lovers. He had spent all these years in Massachusetts. And I just thought, oh, Roadrunner. Like, that should be the name of the movie. I should open the movie with Roadrunner. And that was like one of those like first thoughts, like way back in the beginning.
And someone says he's a runner towards the end of the film.
Well, that happened later. But before I had even done most of the interviews, I kind of just had this idea. I was like, surely I'll come up with a different title or a different song. And we tried and thought about it. And I was like, it couldn't be that easy. It couldn't just be that. But then suddenly I was like, it has to be that.
Wow.
And it just stuck.
Well, you see, he's pacing. He's seeking. He's grasping and for answers. And it's really, it was interesting to me to just think about your journey in that. You seem personally like a filmmaker who is, pretty balanced. And I don't know exactly, but you're exploring someone who's really riding an edge through a lot of this.
Well, yeah, and he's running and he's searching, and they're two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. He was a searcher, and searching we think of as being a good thing. But if you're an Uber searcher, then you're you're kind of lost. I mean, there's this scene that we had in there, and there was this footage of him getting a tattoo when he was maybe 50, 56, where he gets this tattoo that says in ancient Greek, "I am certain of nothing." And Tony kind of loved that idea, and feels very, kind of Zen, and, but the more I think about it, when you're in your late 50s and you're really certain of nothing, there's something kind of tragic about that.
When you've tried everything.
Yeah. And that you've got a kid and people that love you and success, for him to be kind of searching and curious and uncertain in that way that became a kind of a North Star, to me really meant that he was because he was always moving ahead, he was never hanging on to the things behind him. So he was always kind of lost, and I keep thinking of him, that kind of searching, I kept thinking of the image of Lady from Shanghai with the Hall of Mirrors. I kept picturing Tony in this setting because I felt like he was somebody who was doing the right thing to such an extreme that he turned it into something that was actually self-destructive. His romanticism. Again, I mean, this is all the things that made him great were the things that were his flaws. It's great to be romantic. It's great to be curious. It's great to be a searcher. But if you do those things to the nth degree, they actually become liabilities.
I think Iggy Pop is probably the heart of the film to me. Like that, when he drops that note, tell me about that.
I mean, that moment to me, when I came across that, I was like, oh, this is it. Because it's one of those things where, yeah, I mean, as you see in the scene, like Iggy's his hero. I mean, his real hero. And for Iggy to say something that surprising and so true, to appreciate love and the people who give you that love. I mean, that's the message he needed to be hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from spending so much time with so many people in Tony's life, there was so much love for Tony from people who knew him, from people who didn't know him. But it was something that he just couldn't feel, which is something he knew. I mean, he talked about it. He says it in the film.
His face when Iggy says that is just, oh man, wait, I don't know how to do that. Not that he didn't know how to love, but just to feel the love, it seems like. But what's interesting about your film too and the position you were in with this massive editorial mountain is that everyone who you're talking to is in the footage. And it's really a matter of just culling through just all of that to find these incredible moments where you see, the woman who works with him.
Yeah, Helen.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, we set up some other rules for ourselves making the film. Like nobody can talk in the film until they're introduced in the film. So in the beginning, it's just this kind of idea of like, let's actually meet the people in the film. So ideally, exactly who everybody in the film is and how they're connected to him. And, I think there may be 18 interviews in the film. I shot 33 interviews and some great interviews, really cool people and who had interesting things to say. But I just started feeling like it was more and more important for the audience to have a relationship with the people in the film, to really know who they were and how they connected to him, and that we could feel his loss through their pain, I guess. And that if it was just this kind of sea of talking heads, that it would be more impersonal. So I ended up really just culling it down to the 18 people.
Let's talk about the challenge of making those interviews happen. I'm about a man who everyone who you're talking to has felt the grave loss of, and somehow feels, to lose someone to suicide. I think everyone who's been through it, you wonder what you could have done. So they're all experiencing some kind of irrational guilt, probably, right? And their grief is right there, and you're walking into a minefield as a filmmaker. How did you go about that? And there must have been, And I read somewhere that you were pretty exhausted from it too. It was like almost there, like you were.
Oh, it it wasn't like therapy. It was therapy. Because a lot of people, and this is the kind of thing, when you first decide to make a film, I was like, I felt simpatico with Tony. I felt like Tony was a documentary filmmaker in many ways. I was like, and he was somebody who was fighting the good fight, who was trying to humanize people on the other side of the planet, to show, sharing our commonalities and, all those kinds of things he talked about, and, the value of curiosity and travel and being open-minded. Like, that was what I was like, yeah, I totally am on that mission. And then I was like, oh, but when I started making the film, I was like, I really have to reconcile that with what he did and kind of the destructive journey he was on. And in spending so much time with so many people in his life, it just became more and more apparent to me that like I had to give that space in the film. I mean, I think if I had made this film in 5 years, it probably would be it wouldn't be so raw, but when I started talking to people, that rawness wasn't even under the surface, because a lot of people in the film, particularly around suicide, people feel guilt, but they feel shame. They feel like they can't talk about it and they can't burden people around them with it. And so when I showed up and I was like, let's talk about everything you're feeling, so many people said, I haven't even talked to my spouse about this. Like, I haven't really told them what I'm feeling. And those interviews, like normally my interviews on a normal documentary might be 90 minutes or something. And I instantly was like, okay, it's like one day an interview. Like, these are just going to go and go and go. And often would go after the interview and we just keep going. And that, yes, it was hard, but I was also like, I am so grateful for these people to be trusting me and to be kind of going on this. Like, it felt like it was helpful. Like, I wanted the film to be helpful, to help them come to terms with it, and to help the public in a way, not to give them a tidy answer, because Tony would have hated that, and I don't think it exists, but to at least give people some understanding of how to think about Tony and what he did. Because I feel like when I first started making the film, and I would talk to people and say, I'm making a film about Anthony Bourdain, a common reaction I would get was, it's so sad what he did. I haven't been able to watch his show. I don't know what to think about it. Like, I just have to put him out of my mind. Like, it's such a disconnected event from people's perception of him that I think it just short-circuited how people felt about him. And I wanted to create a more holistic picture that people could at least understand the connections between the guy they thought they knew and the guy who killed himself. So the whole thing was an act of therapy. I mean, for him, for the interviewees, for me, hopefully for the audience. And I say that in a good way. I'm grateful for those things.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really deep exploration of a person who also, you have so many layers going on, because also he really did have. I love the opening and him just waking up and getting out of bed and smoking that cigarette and writing, and it's such the, I was seeing that sitting next to. I knew my nephew was in the audience, who's only 21, and I was thinking about him as a writer and how it's like a hero, right, to watch, and it's very important the way you treated it, because yes, it's heroic, and he is this artist who's on a quest, and he's the chef who's wondering why the fish is late, and then he's suddenly got a show, and then the show blows up, and next thing you know, he realizes actually, Beirut. Tell us about that. I mean, that was a huge turning point in his life, and so you're mapping this career of a man who realizes who he is and what he's interested in, and then kind of burns out on every single thing. It seems like.
Well, and again, I kind of made a decision to start the film where we start. Well, for a number of reasons, but the film starts when he's 43. And, Kitchen Confidential is published. For those of you that read Kitchen Confidential, he had a 20-plus year career that he wrote about in the kitchen. And I kind of felt like this starts where Kitchen Confidential ends, and that they're actually very complementary. But if I was to tell the early story, and I talked to some people from his earlier life in the Kitchen Confidential days, but, there's no footage of that time and it would have been a different quality to the film, but also it just would have, to me, felt a little bit like a greatest hits album. Like, remember that story? Remember that character you like so much in the book? Well, here's that story again. Like, I just didn't want to do that. And to me, it was more interesting to have somebody who in middle age has this transformational success and is kind of given everything they always dreamed of. And does that fix him? I mean, that becomes the story. And that to me was a much more interesting story to tell.
The line where he's alone and he's like, I don't know whether it's better to be alone in a shitty circumstance or whether it's better to be alone in a gorgeous place where you can't share it with anyone. It kind of summed it up, his ennui at just his success. Success is definitely not going to make happiness for him.
No, I mean, that's it, spoiler alert, money doesn't buy happiness.
Right.
It's like we know these things, but they may, it's the sense that they may prolong, or may distract you from your unhappiness.
Yeah, alleviate.
I talked to, several of the people in the film. I asked, what do you think would have happened if Kitchen Confidential had never come out? And the answer I got most was he would have killed himself earlier. That this was, and whether or not it's killing himself literally or doing it with drugs or doing it with self-destructive behavior, there was certainly a self-destructiveness that was there for a long time. I mean, if you read Kitchen Confidential, it's amazing how fatalistic and dark that book is. I mean, he talks about this kind of behavior. There's a passage in Kitchen Confidential where he is imagining being hit by an ice cream truck and dying in the street. And he says, as I lie there dying, am I going to regret that I didn't, sleep with this woman or eat this thing or go to this place? And he said, no, the only thing I'm going to regret is how much I let down the people who cared about me. And he wrote that in 1999.
Well, that's what I can't get my head off, is he left a daughter behind.
Yeah.
That part to me.
I mean, as a parent, that's the thing that I think for a lot of people is just, how do you do that? But you do that by convincing yourself that people are better off without you.
Right.
Which
that brings us to Asia.
Yeah.
Asia, who didn't sit down with you for understandable reasons, I think. But tell me about.
I didn't
that
ask her
story.
to do an interview.
You didn't even ask, right?
No.
Okay.
And part of it, part of the complication of that story is like, and if you've read about it, and if you get into the, like the machinations of that relationship is so complicated that it had this gravitational pull that, and I played with it in the edit, and the more we got into it, the more it just made people ask more questions. And the further it got me away from feeling close to Tony, and more it got me into kind of trying to explain tons of stuff that didn't really matter. Mm-hmm. The thing you need to know is that Tony was had this domestic relationship that didn't work and was looking for something dangerous and looking to kind of chase these highs again. The last year of his life, you see it. The leather jacket comes back. He starts smoking again. He starts drinking like a fish. There's a kind of behavior he'd kind of put away for a long time that came back at the end that I think wasn't because of Asia. That was, she fit into that model he had for himself.
It's the line about addiction. He just turned his addiction to her at that point.
Yeah.
I think his producing partner says.
I think that's one read of it.
But I feel like, am I wrong that in some ways at least in the story of this film, the heartbreak from that, the deception or the feeling that that the tabloids had, that she was there with this other man. It was just, that was, if what Iggy Pop said, and that love is the thing, and he really truly loved her.
I don't know.
It's,
I'm saying one could also read it that it's not heartbreak, it's humiliation. That maybe they did have an open relationship, and maybe it was more the fact that he felt ashamed of, so publicly being seen as being, cuckolded by his girlfriend in a way that really would have been painful for him.
For anyone,
Yeah.
frankly. It's really, very tragic. Well, how about you? Where does this fit into? So, I mean, one of my favorite films of yours is Best of Enemies, another film that's just rife with conflict. I love that film.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about, your
How do I
films.
go
They're
from
all
Mr.
very
Rogers
different.
to Anthony Bourdain?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
From Mr. Rogers to Anthony Bourdain. How do you break things down? I mean, is it basically form follows content in every film? You just kind of sink your way into.
I'm kind of a method director, meaning I absorb my subject as much as you can, and again, it's like music, film, everything. Like I'm just trying to be like, what is their ethos? And then I try and make a film that best represents that ethos. A film like Won't You Be My Neighbor, it was like being as pure and simple and deep and loving as you could possibly be. And a film like Best of Enemies is about, kind of hyper intellectual conflict and kind of people arguing about the nature of society in this kind of battle of egos and wills, but a film that has it's like a boxing match. There's a chaos to it. And so this film, to me, I mean, it's interesting because I read his memos he would send on edits of his episodes. We quote a couple of them, but, so I had a lot of thinking, insight into what he thought about how things should be edited and what kind of storytelling he wanted to do. And to digest it, it's pretty much break all the fucking rules, be punk rock. If you're doing something that's safe, you failed. Like push the boundaries is pretty much creatively push it as far as you can. And so in that way, I was like, okay, Tony, like you're telling me to do this. And in that way, and it's everything from the music to the editing.
To the deep fake. Tell us about that. That was fun to read. I read about it in the LA Times.
I think everybody read about it.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in the beginning, like in the very beginning when I started thinking about the film, I just thought, if you make a film about Bourdain that doesn't have his voice in it, something's going to be missing. Because the thing that made his show and made us have a relationship to him is his voice, his writerly voice. So I was like, I feel like if this was like Sunset Boulevard and he's narrating it from the grave. And I knew he loved Sunset Boulevard. He actually shot a recreation of Sunset Boulevard in his first show, Cook's Tour, floating in the pool at the Chateau Marmont across the street. And it seemed like the kind of thing he would be into. And I talked to everybody about it. And I said, there's this new technology and we could use some of it. And then when I finally went into what he wrote and said, I actually put together a binder that's 500 pages of like every quote he said in books, in the show, books on tape, podcast interviews, like him on every subject that I was interested in. And then I sorted it by subject. And so I had this, like, this is what Tony thinks about everything,
I want to see that.
And it's interesting amazing. Because, he was his own best subject. He was always the star of his own story. He documented and told his own story again and again. So what I realized is he talked about almost everything, And so there were just a couple of instances, his description of Vietnam, where he's talking, it's like a pheromonic thing. That was a quote he had written talking about Vietnam. And I just thought it was so beautiful and better than what he had written in his VO for the Vietnam episode. And then there was the email that David Cho read to me, which to me seemed very obvious that it was, not that we wouldn't have him saying that. And then there's the quote in Nashville when he's getting the tattoo, which is kind of reflecting on celebrity. And it was like 44 seconds of stuff. And I thought, it was kind of punk rock.
It is
So I did
it's
it.
pretty punk rock. Yeah. So
You
so
know.
you took the words, and then how did you do it?
They were
Like,
his quotes, and then we tried a couple different companies. We ended up working with the company, and we created a model of his voice, and we did revisions. And
how do you create a
it's
model?
not easy.
No, I've never done it yet, but I'm
Yeah.
excited.
I mean, I will say,
it's
the
terrifying.
day the story broke, 3 other people called me and said they're doing the same thing right now.
Right. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, when it's a posthumous film like this as well, it seems like an intelligent move, but at the same time.
So the way you do it, it's not like you can just type in a sentence and it'll do it. I mean, so what you do is take a large amount of audio that you have, and the larger the amount, the better it works. So we had maybe 10 hours of audio that we gave, and it built this kind of model of how his voice works. And then we would give them a kind of like we just read an inflection guide of like where the emphasis is in the sentence. And then they would give us back a version of it. And then we'd say, that word sounds weird, or that thing's not right, and so it was some back and forth. And then in the mix, we would fix it. But at the end of the day, like I said, it was a few sentences. So for me, I was like, oh, it's like kind of an interesting, edgy thing we're doing.
A technique, right?
So
there's just a lot of there's a lot of, like we were saying, earlier, it's a lot of negativity around AI, and it's triggering.
Well, it's
a little
scary.
bit.
It's scary. It's like, I'm not,
yeah.
What can happen in terms of, what people say in our politics and what world leaders
for
say.
Socio-political warfare.
There are, and I do feel like people, if you know my work, you know how much and how deeply I care about the subjects I'm working on. But I think, from what I understand, people got quite upset.
Oh, I didn't think, at least in the article I read, it didn't seem damning of you. It just was a portal through which to look at the pervasiveness of the technique.
It's interesting because so many doc filmmakers have reached out. I mean, because what people do with Frankenbiting.
Oh my God.
Which is which is way worse.
It's all in the edit.
Way worse.
Yeah.
Where people are literally.
I've sometimes offered, I've been in situations myself where I've had a subject who is very reluctant to speak because they believe I have a certain point of view on a controversial subject. And I have offered to send an uncut version of that interview to them so that they can see that the edits that I put in the film are truthful to their intention. And I stand by that. I think that should be a way to handle that should be maybe a way that we need to treat our subjects sometimes, because they should have that right, because it is so easy to manipulate what people are saying in the edit. And certainly taking Anthony Bourdain's exact words and running them through a filter to have his voice speak them is not a manipulation of his actual intent. So that's why I don't find
it's
it.
Like I can't say what he would have thought, but I can say what he did think about how to approach things and like
push the boundaries.
Push it. And, and I'm happy with that decision. Would I have done that with Mr. Rogers? Like, no. Again, like that's not his ethos.
Right.
It's a totally different thing.
I always say form should follow content, in my opinion.
No,
and so
absolutely.
I want to make sure to not I want to allow the audience to ask a question or two, and I know we only have a few minutes left, I'm hearing. So is there, yes, right there.
No, the estate didn't have to give us any permission, nor, according to CNN, who was making the film, they didn't want the estate that was not against CNN's rules. Like the estate was not supposed to have any permission. I had final edit, and the estate had given that to me. The representative for the estate, who is Kim Witherspoon, who is his kind of work wife, his manager agent for 20 years, she said to me before, and she said to me after everybody got angry about it, she's like, Tony would not have cared. That was her quote.
Well, then it's fine.
His brother was like, I think it's clever. Like his longtime assistant and co-writer was like, really, Tony wouldn't have given a shit. Like,
I would only lose sleep if those people had an issue, or Tony himself, and that would be it.
So,
Well, you nailed it. I really do think you did ride that wave, and you did it. You presented something that he would love, that also puts a very important sober close on it. Is very important. So congratulations, and thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. If you'd like to hear more from our documentary series, check out episode 307, featuring director Matthew Heineman discussing his documentary feature The Boy from Medellin with Ondi Timoner. You can find past episodes of The Director's Cut wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.